10, 9, 8. Go for main engine start. 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. And 0 and liftoff.
Houston is now controlling. The roll maneuver is complete at degree 136 by 36 statute mile orbit.
How to get the shuttle into orbit if your inertial system failed. How to deorbit if the inertial system failed. How to land if you had no guidance and everything.
Right, yeah.
In other words, what's high key for a space shuttle? And that means something every pilot needs to know. What's high key in case you have to come in and do a gliding flame out landing. You're normally doing a flame out landing in the shuttle. You better be doing a flame out landing in the shuttle. But most of the time you have guidance, so you need to have some idea. If you had to fly this thing just literally winging it, what are the altitudes and everything? He had all those numbers. So I got all those numbers to him, committed them to my memory, and I was prepared to do the same thing. And the, what's really incredible is that today, so I'm involved in a rocket company, getting a rocket company going. And we can do, using computational fluid dynamics and advanced software and advanced computers, we can simulate combustion, we can simulate fluid flow, we can simulate all these things and say, well, I think this will work in our rocket engine. Let's run a few simulations. Let's see what it works, and then we can test it. We have a really good idea of what's going to happen. These things like the XB-70, they didn't have all that stuff. They had slide rulers. Maybe they had some calculators. They had a few computers, but they didn't have computational fluid dynamics. They didn't have all the tools we have today. There were the engineers that designed these things were amazing. The pilots that flew them were incredible because they had less of an idea what was going to happen when they took off than certainly we do today. When I flew as a test pilot, most stuff had been simulated. I remember on my first mission, I was dropping 2 tanks off an F-16, and they briefed me on the mission and gave me the information they had up till that date. And they had run a lot of simulations and everything, and they said, well, do you have any questions, sir? And I said, well, I think there's a 3 in 5 probability that the tank hits the airplane. And they said, that's our calculation too. And the tank hit the airplane. Yeah, that was my first test mission. I remember coming down, and the ops officer was a Canadian exchange officer, Bruce. And I came down from the mission. He said, well, Sid, if that was your first test mission, I wonder what you're doing for an encore now. They had given me all the raw data, and so I told my kids. So my kids challenged me. They say, because every time they would do something unsafe, I'd say, don't do that. That's unsafe. And they're like, Dad, what are you doing talking to us about unsafe stuff? You flew airplanes. You were a fighter pilot. You were a test pilot. You flew in space and everything. And I say, yeah, but everything I did was for a reason, and I calculated the odds. I knew what the odds were. And I realized that throughout my life, I've always calculated the odds. Okay, so what are the odds? What's the risk? What's the payoff? Is it worth it? So I said those were all calculated decisions, as opposed to just, driving too fast or something or other. I mean, that's not a calculated decision. That's just carelessness. Okay, so those are different things. Now they have kids, they better understand. So the first shuttle mission I flew on was a mission to study the human body in space. Up until then, people had gathered some information about how humans respond to the weightless environment, near weightless, microgravity environment in space, but they hadn't taken along instruments to actually measure things that a doctor or hospital would measure if you went into a doctor and he was trying to do a diagnosis on you. In this particular mission, we flew a lot of those things. We had devices that could measure percentages of air you were breathing in and out. We had sonograms. We had we were gathering samples from all the astronauts. And so it was very detailed study. Everybody was sharing the information. The different investigators were sharing the information. So we actually discovered a lot of things some things that were thought to be true were found to be false. And so it was a very interesting mission. I got to fly as the pilot. Originally, the pilot and commander weren't going to be part of the sample size for the mission, but we decided, the commander came to me and said, Sid, you know, they've got 5, we can increase the N, the sample size, to 7 if we participate. I said, sounds good to me. So we decided to participate as guinea pigs. We didn't run a lot of the experiments, but we were experimented on. So we wound up doing all the tests in advance and everything. I mean, they knew, you know, what was coming in and out of our body and everything. So, but I actually flew as the pilot, which is NASA speak for the co-pilot. So before I flew the mission, I talked to a lot of other pilots. In addition to the training, I would sit down with a pilot. I would walk by some pilot that, you know, had flown before, would be sitting in his office, and I'd say, do you have some spare time? I'd sit down, chat with him about, you know, what did you experience? What were you surprised by? So that when I finally flew, there was only one thing that really surprised me. And so the pilot is responsible for the main engines, the electrical system, the reaction control jets, the fuel cells, keeping all those things operating. The commander is primarily responsible for flying if it needs to be manually flown, for the computers, which normally behave themselves, and the environmental control system, which takes a while to create an issue or whatever. So it's divided up that way, so the commander concentrates on flying the vehicle, the pilot concentrates on keeping the systems going. So the most important system, of course, are the main engines. If you lose a main engine, your day, your life, everything has changed. So I was watching those main engines and all the instrumentation on them as closely as I could, and we got a vibration. And the turbo pumps are turning at 44,000 RPM, so a vibration is kind of important. And then it went away. And I thought, okay, well, I don't know what that was about. Nobody had mentioned that to me. So then probably 30 seconds later, it started up again, and it went away. And it did that about 5 times before I finally concluded, if this engine is going to come apart, it would have done it by now, okay? So I relaxed a little bit again. I mean, I'm still all over it. You got 8 minutes and 33 seconds, and so you focus the whole time. When we got down, they asked me, was there anything that surprised you? And I mentioned this vibration. And they said, oh, we forgot to tell you. So it had been several years since they had flown with a space lab in the back. And they said they had discovered that the space lab sets up a certain harmonic when the engines are vectored. And it dies out after a little while, but pilots had noticed it. I said, it's an important thing to mention to pilots. I said, cost me a couple minutes on the end of my life, okay? I probably have less life expectancy because of that, but no big deal, mention it in the future. People ask, what does it feel like when you're going through the atmosphere? It's actually a very rough ride. So you're being pushed by these solid rocket boosters. Solids don't burn very smoothly, they burn rough. They have aluminum particles in there and everything. They just burn rough. They don't burn smoothly like a liquid bipropellant engine. In addition to that, if you look at a space shuttle, you know it wasn't designed to go real fast, or it doesn't look like it was designed to go real fast. So it's actually a type of lifting body. So when you start pushing it like 460 knots, that's a lot of stress on it. In fact, after I flew the first time and sort of feeling the stress that the vehicle goes through the atmosphere at 460, 470 knots, had I not seen a vehicle fly and come back with the wings, I would have been convinced we didn't have any wings anymore, that they had been ripped off. So it's a very rough ride. It feels like I've never been inside a washing machine, but feels a little bit like what I would imagine it would be like being inside a washing machine. You're being vibrated around pretty hard. When the solids come off, it gets a lot smoother. You continue to accelerate till you're accelerating at a constant 3 Gs. I had undergone 9 Gs in the F-16, but 3 Gs sustained for the better part of 8 minutes and 33 seconds. That's a while, even though you get them right through the center of your body, so that you're laying on your back. So that works out. So that's interesting. When you finally get up into space and the engine shut down, you're excited about the fact that everything operated fine. The pilot and commander are aware that there are still things to do before you're actually secured in orbit, but you're happy about the fact that you've made it that far.
In your second mission, you switched seats?
Second mission, I was a commander, so I had the opportunity to command a mission, which was very exciting. I mean, if you're a pilot, you always want to be like the flight commander eventually, or the squadron commander or something or other. So I got to be the shuttle commander. And I was excited about that. I tried to do the best job I could. I did the same thing. I went and talked to a bunch of previous shuttle commanders. I said, what would you do different if you had it to do over again? Amazingly, one of them, I think it was Hank Hartsfield, told me I would take my crew camping. I said, what? He said, I would take my crew camping. He said, because going in space, the closest thing to going in space is going camping. And you have to work out some issues. So everybody has to cooperate, work together. You know, when it's your turn to clean the latrine, you need to clean the latrine. So you need to get those issues worked out before you go up in space. So I said, good idea. So I took my crew camping. And there wasn't any funds to go do that or whatever, but it was something fairly easy to do. It also worked well in that I could get the crew off for like a day and a half by themselves without the phone ringing, without people bothering us, without the scheduler coming in and wanting to change something. They couldn't reach us because we were off at a campground where they didn't know where we were. And we could focus and we could work out those issues. Everybody got to help prepare meals. Everybody got to help pick up the trash. Everybody got to sort of sleep in tents kind of together. And then we finished it off by then the families showing up. So we went out Thursday, all day Thursday, part of Friday. Friday after school, the families show up. So then we camp out through Saturday, and the families all got to know each other. So the kids on the crew became literally like brothers and sisters. I mean, they were integrated. By the time we flew in space, they were all undergoing a similar experience. They all knew each other, and they treated each other like brothers and sisters. I thought it was a great opportunity for them.
Do you still stay in touch with some of the people
Yes.
on your missions and stuff?
Yeah, particularly my second mission. A lot of the data on my second mission is still being reduced, analyzed, understood. And so the two mission specialists who were responsible for that still send out information on it, data. We update, we trade emails back and forth, and joke and tease each other, and yeah, all that's still going on. Yep.
Did you want to talk about the Challenger incident at all? Totally up to you.
Yeah, I don't have any problems talking about the Challenger incident. I think both of the accidents were unfortunate. I think, obviously the investigations revealed that both of the accidents could have been avoided. More important, I think, is that both accidents were very survivable with an adequate crew escape system. So I became an advocate for an adequate crew escape system. Was not a popular position to advocate for within the office. People didn't want astronauts advocating for that, but in my entire life, I've never shied back from speaking my mind, and as a result of that, now when I'm 68 years old, I don't have any regrets. I don't go like, I wish I had spoken up here, I wish I had spoken up there. Sometimes there were negative penalties for speaking up. I won't tell you that there are not negative penalties for speaking your mind and speaking up, but the positive part of it is you get to look yourself in the mirror and not feel uncomfortable about it, okay? I think I did the things that I thought needed to be done, so I advocated for a crew escape system. After I left NASA, I was appointed to the Aerospace Safety Advisory Panel. We advocated for a crew escape system every year I was on the panel, up until the second accident, the Columbia accident. The Columbia accident was also survivable with an adequate crew escape system. And so in neither case were the astronauts killed when the accident actually occurred. They died later on. And had they had an adequate crew escape system, both accidents were survivable. I actually recommended to the NASA administrator, Mike Griffin, that he end the shuttle program, either put in an adequate crew escape system or end the shuttle program. And his response was to end the shuttle program. He had already decided to do that in advance of my discussion with him, but I reinforced that. He said he was going to fly enough flights to get the space station up. I reminded him that the risk level was not changing, and that we could lose another vehicle. He said he was well aware of that, and And he said he's an NASA administrator, and I said, as long as you inform the president of what the risk level is, that's fine. As long as the president is fully aware that he may have to deal with another accident, then, and the astronauts are fully aware, because I certainly made them fully aware. We were able to successfully fly another 10 missions, and so I thought that was great. I thought it was good. Yeah, people ask me, are you sorry they retired the program? And I'm like, no, I recommended they retire the program before that. So now I'm committed. I'm involved with a rocket company. We're building a hybrid rocket engine to make space launch safer, more reliable, and more affordable. And it's a result of my experience as an astronaut on the shuttle program.
Fantastic. Are you doing something similar to SpaceX then, where they try and bring it back? You know,
No, ours is, we might eventually decide to make it reusable, but currently ours is so affordable, it doesn't make sense for us to try to reuse it. I mean, it is, we can build a rocket engine for a fraction of the cost that other people can. So we have what I tell investors, an unfair competitive advantage. And I like unfair competitive advantage. I don't like to play fair. I'm a fighter pilot, okay?
What's the name of the company? You plug the company?
Rocket Crafters.
Awesome.
Yep.
Awesome.
So in Columbia, in the case of Columbia, the vehicle came apart a little bit above 200,000 feet. And the crew cabin came out. So the vehicle is building the space shuttle is very interesting, because it can barely take 3 Gs, because it has to be as light as possible. So it's not built like an F-15 is built. It's much more, I would use the word flimsy or whatever. So when it started going sideways, when they lost the left wing and they started going sideways, they lost directional stability, the vehicle came apart, but the crew cabin came out of that. So the crew cabin is an aluminum pressurized structure that the crew is in. Imagine a can or something like that. So they're in that. That came out. It's built out of aluminum. So it made it down to about 160,000 feet when it melted and came apart. Had it made it down to about 120,000 feet, the crew probably would have been able to survive. Had somebody taken that crew cabin before they put the exterior shell on it and covered it with like the foam that you get at Home Depot or Lowe's or something like that, it probably would have been able to make it down below 120,000 feet and probably would have been survivable. So the crew survived from about 200,000 feet down to about 160,000 feet. It's not comfortable thinking that the crew was in there surviving, but as a test pilot, as a pilot, as an astronaut, you need to confront and think about unthinkable things in order to avoid them happening again. Yep. So on my first mission, there were 7 of us up in space. One day we got a call and we were told that the Russian space station was going to pass about 9 to 13 miles off our left wing. And so it was far enough away that they weren't worried about us hitting it. Had we been within about 3 miles or so, they would have had us maneuver to avoid hitting it. But it was close enough that we might be able to see it. So they said, you know, turn the lights down and look out this window at this time. You should see it going by. So I'm sure the Russians were notified. They were actually Soviets back in those days, before the fall of the Soviet Union. And so we turned out the lights, everybody's very quiet, and we're looking out the windows. And it dawned on me, okay, so there are 10 of us in space, 10 humans in space, billions of people down on Earth. So I thought, I'm very fortunate to be up in space. So I appreciate that. That's why I'm happy to share the experiences. I also thank the American people, the American taxpayer, for having funded my trips into space.
Well, we learn a lot of science through all
Absolutely.
this. I mean, it's worth it.
Absolutely. We've learned a lot.
What would you say to maybe inspire an airman? Maybe they're thinking about getting out, or they think, you know, because you can switch careers, you can switch aircraft like you did. You can do a lot in the U.S. military today, and even, you know, if you have a job, say, outside the fence, you know, in aviation or whatever, you can get into the space program. What would you say to inspire the youth or somebody that's kind of thinking about joining, or, you know, thinking about, you know, taking a route similar to what you did, you know?
So I think about the military, the Air Force in particular, and I joined because I wanted to defend the innocent. I mean, ultimately, that's what the military does, is defend the innocent against the strong, the bullies. And as regardless of what role you play in the military, I had an opportunity for a brief period of time while I was at Holloman to actually be what we would call the sharp end of the sword or the pointy end of the spear. But there are a lot of people behind that. And everybody in the military has a role in defending the innocent and making the world a better place for everybody to live. That's why I joined the military. And I don't know whether it's inspiring to other people or not, but it's inspiring to me. When I think back, I had a role in keeping the world safe for some period of time. And so that's what I would tell young people. That's where the satisfaction should come from, for being part of a team that does that. Not necessarily true, but I think the United States can defend itself. But the United States, I believe the United States has to do more than that. The United States has to be stability in the world. There are a lot of people in the world whose lives are going to be absolutely horrible if the United States doesn't establish some stability in the world. So when I joined the military, the sacrifices I thought I was making for more than people in the United States. I was making for those poor. I remember, when we went into Afghanistan, one of the saddest things I remember was, so I'm a grandfather. I can associate with grandfathers. There was a grandfather who had lost a grandchild when we went into Afghanistan during the fighting and up in the mountains or something or other, and they were asking him about that, and he said that was a sacrifice he was willing to make. It was so terrible there that he was glad we came in, and despite the fact that he had lost a grandchild, he was thankful that we had come into that situation. And it takes a country like the United States to correct things like that. I remember watching the videos of women being executed in soccer stadiums. People forget about those videos, we changed that. We defend the innocent. Yeah.
You stood on the shoulders of giants, in the space program.
Well, and I got to meet some of those giants.
What was that like to join a program that was already established, and what they did led up to what you were able to do? What was that like?
It was wonderful. So in my lifetime, I had the opportunity to work at NASA shortly, not that long after the Apollo program. So there were still people from the Apollo program there at that time. I also had the opportunity to work at Sandia National Labs after the Manhattan program. Okay, there were still people from the Manhattan program. So I consider the two great engineering feats of the 20th century, I could be wrong, but I consider landing on the moon and splitting the atom. And in many ways, the teams that did those two things were very similar. I mean, it was a tremendous national emergency. They had tremendous resources. They had almost unlimited resources to call upon to get them done, but they were very difficult problems and time constraints, tremendous time constraints. And so it was great to be able to meet people from the Apollo program who had been involved in it, particularly some of the astronauts, but also a lot of the support personnel that were still along that had been involved in doing that. And I consider myself very fortunate to not be part of those two efforts. I don't claim to be part of those two efforts, but I was able to work with people who were involved in both of those, and it was a wonderful experience to have.